Chapter 1. The night the court fell silent, the carriage wheels had stopped turning an hour ago. Alara pressed her palm against the frosted window, watching her breath cloud the glass. Beyond the iron gates, Blackmore Keep rose like a wound against the winter sky, all sharp towers and shadowed stone, wrapped in fog that never quite lifted. 7 years she had lived within those walls. 7 years since she'd been delivered here on her wedding night, a treaty sealed in silk and ceremony. A bride given to a king who ruled the dark. 7 years since he'd last spoken her name. She heard the horses stamping in the cold, heard the coachman's low curse as he wrestled with the luggage. But she didn't move, didn't reach for the door. Because once she crossed that threshold again, once she returned to the palace that had become her prison, there would be no more pretending. The Alpha King's wife. That's what they called her in the mortal cities. A title that meant power, protection, fear. But here, in the vampire courts, where bloodlines were law and eternity was currency, she was something else entirely. She was unclaimed. My lady, the coachman's voice cracked through the silence. We can't wait much longer. The sun's nearly down. Alara closed her eyes. The sun's nearly down. As if she didn't know. As if she hadn't spent 7 years learning to read the light. Tracking the minutes until dusk, when the keep would wake and the halls would fill with voices that never aged. Never warmed, never lied about what they were. The door opened. Cold air flooded in, sharp as a blade. Lady Alara. The steward stood in the snow, his face carefully blank. He was mortal, like her, one of the few. His Majesty requests your presence in the throne hall. Her heart kicked once hard. Now, he's already waiting. 7 years. 7 years of separate wings, separate schedules, separate lives. The Alpha King had given her everything: titles, jewels, rooms filled with books and firelight, and asked for nothing. No consummation. No blood. No touch. She'd been a wife in name only. A political ornament kept pristine and untouched while the court whispered, and the rival houses watched with hungry eyes. And now he wanted to see her. Alara gathered her cloak and stepped into the snow. The keep's entrance hall swallowed sound. Marble floors stretched into shadow, lit by candelabras that burned with flames too still to be natural. Alara had learned not to ask questions about the small magics woven into this place. The fires that never flickered. The portraits whose eyes followed. The way some doors locked from the inside even when no one was there. The steward led her deeper, past the grand staircase, past the council chambers where the 5 houses once gathered before the wars began. Her footsteps echoed. His made no sound at all. When they reached the throne hall, he stopped. He asked to see you alone. My lady. Alone. The words settled like frost in her chest. The doors opened without touch. Inside, the hall stretched long and cold, its vaulted ceiling lost to darkness. Moonlight poured through the stained glass windows, crimson and violet and deep, bruised blue, casting the space in shattered color. At the far end, on a throne carved from blackened oak, sat the man she'd married 7 years ago and barely knew, Kayla Shorin, Alpha King, Lord of the Northern Houses. Heir to a bloodline so old the histories had forgotten its beginning. He didn't look up when she entered. Alara's pulse hammered as she walked the length of the hall. He was still as stone, one hand resting on the arm of the throne, his dark hair falling forward to shadow his face. He wore black, always black, tailored and sharp, a uniform for a war that never ended. Even seated, even silent, he radiated the kind of power that made mortals instinctively step back. She stopped 10 paces away. Protocol, distance, the rules they'd built between them like walls. You summoned me. Your Majesty. His head lifted, and for the first time in 7 years, Kayla Shorin looked at his wife. His eyes were the color of smoke and steel, ancient and unreadable. Beautiful in the way a winter storm was beautiful, compelling, dangerous, impossible to turn away from. Alara had seen him across ballrooms, through doorways, at the far end of banquet tables, but she'd never stood this close, never held his gaze. You went to the city, he said. His voice was low, controlled, edged with something she couldn't name. I did, without escort, without guard. I was visiting my sister. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. She's ill. I had permission from the council. The council doesn't rule you. I do. The words hung between them, sharp and sudden. Alara's breath caught. In 7 years, he'd never claimed authority over her movements, never dictated her days. The freedom had been intentional, she'd thought. A kindness, a way to make the cage more bearable. Now she wasn't sure. Forgive me, she said carefully. I wasn't aware you'd object. Something flickered across his face too fast to read, gone before she could name it. He rose from the throne in one fluid motion, descending the steps with the unnatural grace all his kind possessed. When he stopped, he was close enough that she could see the tension in his jaw, the careful control in every line of his body. There's been an attack, Cale said. House Valen struck a supply caravan 2 nights ago. Killed 6 of my people. Took 3 mortals as hostages. Alara's stomach turned. House Valen. The rival bloodline that had contested Cale's rule since before she'd arrived. The ones who believed the old laws, the ones about human vassals and blood ties should still hold. Why are you telling me this? She asked. His eyes searched hers. Because they were asking about you. The cold sank deeper. They wanted to know if the treaty still stands. If you were still. He stopped. Exhaled slowly. Unclaimed. The word landed like a stone. Alara's hands clenched in her skirts. She'd known, of course. Known the court watched. Known the rival houses circled like wolves, waiting for weakness. An unconsummated marriage was a crack in Cale's armor. Proof that the Alpha King's power wasn't absolute. That his control had limits, but hearing it spoken aloud made it real. And what did you tell them? Her voice barely held. Cale's jaw tightened. He looked away, toward the stained glass, toward the night pressing against the windows. When he spoke again, his voice was rough, almost tired. I told them the treaty holds. That you are my wife, my queen, under my protection, but not your claim. The silence stretched. No, he said finally. Not that. Alara didn't know why it hurt. Didn't know why, after 7 years of distance, the confirmation felt like a blow. But it did. She turned to leave. Alara, her name. Her actual name. Not my lady or your majesty or any of the formal shields they'd hidden behind. Just her name, and it stopped her cold. When she looked back, Cale was still staring at the windows. His hands were fists at his sides. Stay in the keep, he said quietly. Until this is over. Please. It was the please that undid her. Alara nodded once and walked away, her heart beating too fast. Her mind spinning with questions she didn't dare ask. Behind her, alone in the throne hall, the Alpha King closed his eyes and tried not to remember what it felt like to want something he couldn't have. Chapter 2. The rules of blood and Sealara didn't sleep that night. She lay in her chambers, the east wing, farthest from the king's quarters, and watched shadows move across the ceiling. The fire had burned down to embers hours ago, but she didn't call for a servant to rebuild it. The cold helped. It kept her sharp, kept her from sinking into the questions that circled like carrion birds. Why now? Why, after 7 years of silence, does he suddenly care where I go? Outside her window, the keep hummed with nocturnal life. Footsteps in distant corridors. Low voices speaking languages older than empires. The vampires were awake, conducting their business in the dark hours that belonged to them. She'd learned their rhythms the way prisoners learn the routines of their guards, not from choice, but from necessity. A knock at her door made her sit up. My lady? A woman's voice, soft and careful. May I enter? Alara recognized the cadence. Come in, Marin. The door opened to reveal a slight figure in servant's gray, one of the few mortal women employed in the keep's inner halls. Marin had been here longer than Alara, nearly 15 years, and her eyes held the particular wariness of someone who'd survived by learning which questions not to ask. She carried a tray with tea and bread, setting it on the table by the window, but her hands trembled slightly, and Alara noticed. What's wrong? Marin glanced toward the door, then back. There are guards posted outside your wing, my lady. 6 of them. The king's personal guard. Alara's stomach tightened. Since when? Since dusk. They're not letting anyone through without clearance. Marin's voice dropped to a whisper. The staff is saying House Valen sent an envoy. That they're demanding an audience. So it was starting. Whatever Cale had been trying to warn her about, it was already in motion. Thank you, Marin. Alara reached for the tea, hoping the steadiness of the motion would calm the panic rising in her chest. You can go. But Marin didn't move. She stood there, worrying the edge of her apron, her face tight with something between fear and pity. My lady, forgive me, but she stopped. Started again. You should know. They're saying the envoy asked about you specifically. About whether you've been, whether the king has, claimed me. Alara finished, her voice flat. I know. Marin's eyes widened. Then you understand what it means. If House Valen thinks the bond isn't sealed, if they believe they can challenge, I said I know. The sharpness in her tone made Marin flinch, and immediately Alara regretted it. She softened. I'm sorry. I need to think. Marin nodded quickly and fled, closing the door with a soft click. Alone again, Alara set down the teacup and pressed her palms to her eyes. 7 years she'd lived in this liminal space, wife but not mate, queen but not claimed. She'd told herself it was better this way. That Kale's distance was a kindness, a way of letting her keep some part of herself untouched by the dark world he ruled. But kindness didn't protect her from politics, didn't stop rival houses from seeing weakness, didn't change the fact that an unclaimed wife was a liability in a world where blood bonds were law. She needed answers, and there was only one person who could give them. The king's study was in the North Tower, accessible only by a spiral staircase that seemed to climb forever. Alara had been there once, years ago, to sign marriage documents. She barely remembered reading. She'd never returned. Now, at 2 in the morning, she climbed those stairs with her heart in her throat. The guards at the door didn't stop her. They simply stepped aside, their expressions unreadable behind their ceremonial masks. One of them knocked twice, then opened the door without waiting for a response. Inside, the study was warm and shadowed, lit by a fire that crackled with genuine flame. Bookshelves lined every wall, crammed with volumes in a dozen languages. Maps were spread across a massive oak desk, marked with pins and notes in Kale's precise hand. And standing by the window, silhouetted against the night, was the king himself. He didn't turn when she entered, but his shoulders tensed, and she knew he'd heard her. You should be resting, he said quietly. I can't. Alara closed the door behind her. Not until you tell me what's really happening. I told you told me there was an attack. That House Valen is asking questions. She moved closer, her voice steadier now. What you didn't tell me is why. Why now, after 7 years? What's changed? Kale's silence stretched long enough that she thought he might not answer. Then he turned, and the firelight caught his face, all sharp angles and controlled exhaustion. He looked older somehow, though she knew that was impossible. Vampires didn't age, but they could tire. The old laws are resurfacing, he said finally. The ones I spent decades trying to bury. House Valen wants to reinstate the blood tithe system. Mortal vassals bound to vampire lords, tribute paid in servitude and feeding rights. Alara's stomach turned. She'd heard whispers of the old ways the time before the treaty, before Kale had reformed the northern houses and established new rules about consent and autonomy. She'd thought those days were history. They can't, she said. You're the Alpha King. You have the authority. My authority comes from the house's acceptance of my rule. Kale's voice was sharp now, edged with frustration. And that acceptance is conditional. They follow me because I'm strong enough to make them. But if they sense weakness, he stopped, breathed. An unclaimed wife is weakness. Alara, it suggests I can't maintain my own bond. Can't fulfill the most basic expectation of an alpha. It gives them ground to challenge. The words hit like physical blows. So I'm the problem. No, he crossed the space between them in 3 strides, fast enough to startle her. No, you are not the problem. This, he gestured sharply, encompassing everything. This arrangement was supposed to protect you, keep you separate from the darker aspects of my world. But Valen is forcing my hand. Alara's pulse hammered. What does that mean? Kale's eyes burned into hers, and for the first time, she saw something raw beneath the control. Something desperate. It means they've given me an ultimatum. Either I prove the bond is real publicly, before the assembled houses, or they take the matter to the old council. And if the old council rules against me, he exhaled slowly, the treaty falls, the reforms fall, everything I've built collapses, and we return to the blood tithe system. Thousands of mortals will suffer. The room tilted. Alara reached for the desk to steady herself. How do you prove it? The bond? Kale's jaw clenched. He looked away, toward the fire, and when he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. Blood exchange, witnessed by the houses. A feeding that creates a permanent connection, one that can't be faked or hidden. It's the oldest law, the one even I can't change. Understanding crashed over her like ice water. He was asking her to let him drink from her, to bind herself to him in a way that would mark her, change her, tie her to his immortal life forever. And if I refuse? She asked, though she already knew the answer. Then I have no defense against their challenge. And when House Valen takes control, He met her eyes again, and the grief there took her breath. I can't protect you if I'm not king, Alara. The fire popped in the silence. Alara's mind raced. 7 years of distance, of careful boundaries, of a marriage that existed only on paper, all of it crashing down because of politics and power plays she barely understood. But she understood this. Kale was asking her to make a choice. To trust him with her blood, her body, her mortality, or to let his world burn. When she heard herself ask, 3 nights, his voice was rough. The houses convene at the full moon. I have until then to prepare you, to explain what the bond means, what it will do to you. And if I agree, she forced herself to hold his gaze. What happens after? Do I just become yours? Property? No, the word was fierce, immediate. Never that. The bond goes both ways, Alara. You'd have access to my strength, my protection. I'd feel your emotions, your pain. We'd be connected, yes, but not. He stopped, struggled. I would never treat you as property. You have my word. His word. As if that meant something after 7 years of silence. But looking at him now, at the exhaustion in his eyes, the barely controlled desperation, she realized something. He wasn't asking because he wanted this. He was asking because he had no choice, just like her. I need time, she said quietly. To think. Kale nodded once, stiff and formal. You have 3 days. After that, he turned back to the window. After that, the choice is made for us. Alara left without another word, her hands shaking, her mind a storm of fear and fury and something else she didn't dare name. Behind her, the Alpha King stood alone in his study and tried not to imagine what it would feel like to finally taste his wife's blood and whether she would ever forgive him for needing it. Chapter 3. Lessons in the dark. The library became Alara's sanctuary. She'd spent the day avoiding the pitying looks of servants, the whispered conversations that died when she entered rooms. By evening, she'd retreated to the keep's oldest wing, where ancient texts lined shelves that reached toward vaulted ceilings, and the only sounds were turning pages and settling dust. She wasn't looking for anything in particular, just distraction, distance from the decision that loomed 3 nights away. You won't find answers in those books, Alara startled, nearly dropping the volume on Northern House lineages she'd been pretending to read. Kale stood in the doorway, still dressed in the formal black from whatever council meeting had occupied his evening. His hair was slightly disheveled, as if he'd been running his hands through it. I wasn't looking for answers, she said, closing the book. Just quiet, then I'll leave you to it. But he didn't move, just stood there, watching her with those unreadable eyes. The silence stretched. Alara set the book aside. Why are you here? I thought. He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. If you're going to make this choice, you should understand what you're choosing, what the bond actually means. I know what it means. You drink my blood. We're connected. The houses. See proof of the marriage. Her voice came out sharper than intended. What else is there? Kale's expression flickered, something almost like hurt crossing his features before the mask returned. Everything else, he said quietly. He moved into the room, careful to keep distance between them. May I? It took Alara a moment to realize he was asking permission to sit in his own library, in his own keep. The absurdity of it nearly made her laugh, but she nodded. He took the chair across from hers, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. This close, she could see the subtle signs of strain, the tightness around his mouth, the shadows beneath his eyes that shouldn't exist on an immortal face. The blood bond isn't just political theater, he began. It's ancient magic, older than the houses, older than the treaties. When a vampire feeds from someone with intent to bond, it creates a connection that runs both ways. You said that already. I said the words. But you don't understand. He met her eyes. I would feel your emotions, Alara. Your fear, your joy, your pain. Not constantly. The bond can be quieted, with practice. But in moments of intensity, I would know. And you would feel mine. The thought sent ice through her veins. Your emotions? What little I have left, he said, and there was something bitter in his tone. Vampires feel differently than mortals. Less urgently, perhaps. But the bond amplifies things. You'd sense when I was near, when I was hurt, when I was. He stopped. Hungry. The word hung between them, weighted with meaning. And the feeding itself? Alara forced herself to ask. Does it hurt? No, his answer was immediate, firm. Not if done correctly. There's venom in our bite. It numbs, creates euphoria. Some mortals even find it. He trailed off, and for the first time, she saw color touch his pale cheeks. Pleasant. Heat crept up Alara's neck. She looked away, suddenly unable to hold his gaze. How often would you need to To feed from me? I wouldn't. The words came out rough. Elara, I haven't fed from a living person in over a century. I use stored blood, donated by willing mortals under contract. I would never ask you to, but the bond requires it. She cut him off, understanding crystallizing. The initial feeding, at least. That's what the houses need to witness. His jaw clenched. Yes. And after? Once we're bonded? After. The connection exists whether I feed or not. You would carry my mark, a scar here. He gestured to the side of his neck. Visible proof that you're claimed. Protected under my house's laws. No vampire could touch you without declaring war on me. Protected. The word should have been comforting. Instead, it felt like another cage. Elara stood, pacing to the window. Outside, snow had begun to fall, blanketing the keep's grounds in silence. What if I hate it? The bond? The connection? What if I can't bear it? She heard him rise, felt him move closer. But he didn't touch her, didn't cross the invisible line she'd drawn. Then we end it, he said simply. The bond can be broken. It's painful, takes months, but it's possible. Once House Valen's challenge is defeated, once the political necessity is past, I would release you. You'd be free to return to your sister, to live whatever mortal life you choose. Elara turned to face him. You'd let me go? Just like that? It was always the plan. His voice was carefully neutral. This marriage was a political arrangement. You were never meant to be trapped here forever. Then why didn't you claim me 7 years ago? Why wait until now, until everything's falling apart? The question seemed to hit him like a physical blow. He took a step back, shadows crossing his face. Because I'm not my father, he said, and his voice had gone cold and distant. Because I've spent my entire reign trying to build something better than the old ways, where mortals were property and vampire lords took what they wanted without asking. You were 18 years old, Elara, terrified, handed to me like a piece of tribute. I wasn't going to, he stopped, breathing hard. I wouldn't do that to you. The rawness in his words caught her off guard. She'd spent 7 years assuming his distance was indifference, that he simply didn't want her enough to bother. But this, so you've been protecting me, she said slowly. This whole time. From yourself, from everything. He turned away, presenting his back, a gesture of vulnerability she'd never seen from him. From the darker aspects of court life. From vampires, who would have seen you as food or sport. From the expectations that come with being my queen. I thought if I kept you separate, kept you untouched, you might have something close to a normal life, but I didn't, Elara said quietly. I've been suspended between worlds, Kale. Not quite your wife, not quite free. Do you know what that's been like? Watching you from across ballrooms, wondering what I did wrong. Why? You couldn't even look at me. He turned back, and the anguish in his eyes stole her breath. I look at you, he said, voice barely above a whisper. I've always looked at you. But if I let myself do more than that, if I let myself want, he shook his head. You deserve better than to be wanted by something like me. The admission hung in the air between them, vulnerable and raw. Elara's heart hammered. She should be frightened, should be angry at 7 years of miscommunication and misplaced nobility. But instead, she felt something shift inside her, a crack in the wall she'd built around her heart. What if I get to decide what I deserve? She asked. Kale's eyes widened slightly. Elara, you're asking me to let you bind us together, to trust you with my blood and my body. But you won't trust me with the truth about what you feel. She moved closer, emboldened by his shock. If we do this, if I agree to the bond, I need honesty. No more noble distance. No more protecting me from choices I should make myself. You don't know what you're asking. Then teach me. She stopped an arm's length away. You said I have 3 days. Use them. Show me your world. Explain the rules. Help me understand what I'm choosing. And maybe, she swallowed hard. Maybe we can stop being strangers before you bite me. Something flickered in Kale's expression, hope, fear, hunger, all tangled together. If I do this, if I let you close, it will be harder to let you go. After, when the bond breaks, I know, Elara said, and she did. She knew she was playing with fire, knew that 3 days of truth might hurt worse than 7 years of distance. But she was tired of living in the margins of her own life. Kale studied her for a long moment. Then slowly, he nodded. Tomorrow night, he said, I'll show you the court. The real court after the mortals sleep. And we'll begin your education in what it means to be a vampire's queen. And tonight, a ghost of a smile touched his lips. Tonight you sleep. You'll need your strength. He left her standing by the window. Her reflection ghostly in the glass, her future balanced on a knife's edge. In 3 days, she would give her blood to a vampire king. But first, she would learn what kind of man hid beneath the crown. Chapter 4. The court on Muskedli gown arrived at dusk. Elara stared at the creation laid across her bed, deep burgundy silk that shimmered like wine in candlelight, cut low at the shoulders and fitted through the bodice. It was beautiful and terrifying, a costume for a role she'd never fully played. Marin hovered nearby, hands twisting in her apron. His Majesty sent instructions. He'll collect you at 8th bell. Collect me. Elara touched the silk, feeling it whisper under her fingers. Where exactly am I being collected to? The night court, my lady. Marin's voice dropped. Where the houses gather after dark. It's not like the formal dinners you've attended before. The warning in her tone was clear. Elara had been to state functions, political ceremonies where vampires played at civility for the benefit of mortal witnesses. But the night court was different, the place where they dropped their masks and conducted their true business. Help me dress, Elara said, pushing down her fear. By the time Kale knocked, she was ready, or as ready as she could be. The gown transformed her into something unfamiliar, someone who might belong in the world she was about to enter. She'd left her hair loose, dark waves falling past her shoulders, and applied just enough cosmetics to hide how little she'd slept. When she opened the door, Kale went very still. His eyes traveled over her slowly, and for the first time in 7 years, she saw his control slip. Hunger flashed across his face, not the bloodthirsty kind, but something deeper, more human. Then it was gone, locked back behind his careful mask. You look, he stopped, seemed to struggle. Worthy of the title, Queen? She tried to keep her voice light. Mine. The words sent heat through her chest. But before she could respond, he offered his arm with formal precision. Stay close to me tonight. Don't speak unless spoken to directly. And whatever you see, don't show fear. They can smell it. Comforting, Elara muttered. But she took his arm, his muscles tense beneath her touch, solid and cold. She'd forgotten, or maybe never known, how different his body felt from a mortal man's. No heartbeat, no warmth, just coiled strength wrapped in pale skin. They descended through corridors she'd never walked, down spiral stairs that seemed to burrow into the keep's foundations. The air grew colder, heavier, with the scent of stone and something else, incense, maybe, or very old magic. Music drifted up to meet them. Not the refined chamber pieces from state dinners, but something primal, drums and strings that pulled at the blood. The night court meets in the old throne hall, Kale explained as they walked. It was built by the first house, before the Reformation, before mortals were granted rights. His jaw tightened. Some vampires still consider it sacred ground, a reminder of what we were. What were you? Predators. His voice was flat. Creatures who took what they wanted and called it natural law. The corridor opened into a vast chamber. Elara's breath caught. The old throne hall was nothing like the formal spaces above. This was raw power-made architecture, all black marble and blood-red tapestries, lit by hundreds of candles that cast everything in flickering shadow. The vaulted ceiling disappeared into darkness, and the walls were carved with scenes that made her stomach turn. Hunts, feasts, mortals bowing before vampire lords, and everywhere, vampires. They filled the hall in clusters, dressed in silk and leather and jewels that caught the light like captured stars. Beautiful, every one of them beauty that was too perfect to sharp, predatory even in stillness. Conversations hushed as Kale entered, dozens of inhuman eyes turning to track his movement, and hers, Lord Kale. A woman emerged from the crowd, tall and elegant, with silver hair and eyes like chips of ice. How generous of you to finally grace us with your queen's presence. The mockery in her tone was razor thin. Kale's arm tightened almost imperceptibly under Elara's hand. Lady Sienna. His voice was cordial, but Elara heard the warning beneath. I trust House Valen is enjoying the evening. So this was one of them. One of the vampires pushing for the old ways, questioning Kale's rule. Sienna's gaze slid to Elara, cold and assessing. Charming, she said, though nothing in her expression suggested charm. 7 years we've waited to meet the famous unclaimed bride. Tell me, little queen, do you even know what your husband is? Careful. Kale's voice dropped to a growl that raised the hair on Elara's neck, but Sienna just smiled, showing a hint of fang. Oh, forgive me. I forget how protective you've become of mortal sensibilities. She leaned closer, and Elara caught the scent of her cold stone and old roses. Enjoy the evening, your majesty. Consider it your education in what you're choosing. She swept away, leaving tension crackling in her wake. Ignore her, Kale murmured. She's trying to frighten you. It's working, Elara admitted, his lips quirked almost a smile. At least you're honest. He guided her deeper into the hall, and vampires parted to let them pass. The night court operates on different rules than the mortal world. Older rules. Here, strength and bloodline determine rank. Alliances shift like quicksilver, and every conversation is a negotiation. And you rule all of this? I enforce the peace between them. There's a difference. They reached a raised dais where the thrones sat, one black, one empty. Before the Reformation, these courts were bloodbaths. Rival houses warring, mortals caught in the crossfire. My father believed it was the natural order. He paused. I wanted to build something better. Alara looked at him, really looked. In this light, surrounded by his own kind, he seemed different. Still controlled, still careful. But there was a weight to him here. A burden she'd never fully understood. Why? She asked. Why did you care about building something better? Kale was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was distant, haunted. Because I remember what it was like. Being mortal, being powerless. Alara's eyes widened. You were turned? 200 years ago. I wasn't born into this bloodline, I was made into it. His hand clenched on the throne's armrest. My father wanted an heir strong enough to survive court politics. So he chose a dying soldier from his human territories and gave him immortality. Whether that soldier wanted it or not, the admission hung between them, raw and unexpected. Kale, your majesty, a young vampire approached, bowing deeply. House Thorn requests an audience. The moment broke. Kale's expression shuddered back to regal neutrality. Grant it. For the next hour, Alara stood beside him and watched her husband play the political game. Vampires approached in careful succession, some offering tribute, others seeking favors, all testing his authority in subtle ways. He deflected challenges with cutting words, granted requests with calculated precision, and never once lost his composure. But Alara felt the tension radiating from him, saw the way his jaw tightened when certain names were mentioned, noticed how his eyes tracked every movement in the room, cataloging threats. This was the man she'd married. Not the distant figure in the upper halls, but this, the king holding back a tide of darkness through sheer will. When a break came in the procession, Kale turned to her. You're handling this better than I expected. I'm terrified, she confessed. But I'm also, she searched for the word, fascinated. This is your world, the real one. Something softened in his expression. Yes, and it's brutal and beautiful and utterly unforgiving. He glanced around the hall, then back to her. But you should understand, if we complete the bond, you'll be part of this. Not just decorative royalty, but a player in these games. The other houses will test you, push you, try to find weakness, to use against you. Yes, Alara straightened her spine. Then teach me. Show me how to survive here. Kale studied her face, and she saw something like pride flicker in his eyes. You're braver than you know, or more foolish, perhaps both. This time, his smile was real. Come, there's something else you need to see. He led her to a side corridor, away from the crowd. The music and conversation faded to a distant hum. When they were alone, Kale turned to face her. The bond ceremony happens here, in this hall, he said quietly, before all the assembled houses. They'll watch me feed from you. Watch the mark. Take. It's, he hesitated. Intimate, public, designed to prove the connection is real. Alara's heart hammered. You're trying to scare me into refusing. I'm trying to prepare you. His voice was rough. Because once it's done, there's no hiding. Not from them. Not from each other. Every emotion, every fear, every desire will feel it through the bond. And I need you to understand what you're giving up. Privacy, she said. Peace. He stepped closer, and the intensity in his eyes pinned her. You'll know what I am, Alara. Not the king. Not the reformed ruler, the predator underneath. The hunger that never fully sleeps. The darkness I've spent centuries trying to contain. His voice dropped to a whisper. And I'm not sure you'll forgive me for letting you see it. The vulnerability in his words stole her breath. She reached up slowly, giving him time to pull away, and touched his face. His skin was cold beneath her palm, but he leaned into her touch like a man starving. 2 more days, she said softly. Show me the rest. Then I'll decide. Kale closed his eyes. When he opened them again, they burned with something between hope and dread. Then tomorrow, he said, you learn what it means to witness a feeding. Chapter 5. The taste of trust. Alara didn't expect Kale to come for her at dawn. She'd barely slept. Her mind still processing the night court, the predatory grace of the vampires, the weight of their stares, the realization that in 2 days she would stand before them all and bare her throat. When the knock came, soft and hesitant, she was already dressed in a simple day gown, watching pale sunlight creep across the floor. Come in, she called, expecting. Marin. Kale entered, and she startled. He looked different in daylight, still pale, still otherworldly, but somehow more vulnerable. The shadows under his eyes had deepened, and he moved with careful deliberation, as if the sun itself was a weight against his shoulders. You should be sleeping, Alara said. So should you. He closed the door behind him, leaning against it. I came to ask. There's something I'd like to show you, if you're willing. Now? During the day? Especially during the day. Something flickered across his face, nervousness. Maybe. Last night you saw my world at its strongest. Today, I'd like you to see it at its most honest. Alara's curiosity stirred. What do you mean? Come with me, please. She followed him through empty corridors. The keep was eerily quiet, most of the vampire residents asleep in their sealed chambers, the mortal servants going about their work in whispers. Kale led her down, always down, until they reached a wing she'd never entered. He stopped before a heavy oak door, his hand resting on the iron handle. "This is where we keep the blood reserves," he said quietly. "Donated by willing mortals under contract, people who need money, or healing, or protection. We pay them fairly, ensure their health, and never take more than they can safely give." He met her eyes. "I wanted you to see that we're not monsters. Not all of us." He opened the door. The room beyond was clinical white walls, cool temperature, rows of glass bottles filled with dark red liquid. A young woman in healer's robes looked up from her work, her eyes widening when she saw the king. "Your Majesty?" It's all right, Teresa. I'm just showing my wife the operations." Kale's voice was gentle. "How are your patients today?" "Recovering well, sire. Marcus is ready to donate again next week, and Elena says the payment covered her mother's medicine." Kale nodded, seemingly satisfied. But Alara noticed how carefully he stood, how his eyes tracked the bottles with a hunger he couldn't quite hide. Teresa noticed too. "Sire, when did you last feed?" "I'm fine." "You're not. You're into your third day." The healer's voice was firm despite addressing a king. "You know what happens when you wait too long." "I said I'm fine, Teresa," but his hand trembled slightly on the doorframe. Alara saw it, saw the tightness in his jaw, the way his breathing had gone shallow. He was hungry. Starving himself, maybe. "And she didn't understand why until you haven't fed since you decided to bond with me," she said quietly. Kale's eyes snapped to hers. "That's not you're afraid? That if you feed from stored blood, you won't be able to control yourself with me?" She stepped closer, understanding crystallizing. "You're trying to prove you can do this safely." The silence confirmed it. Teresa cleared her throat. "I'll give you privacy, Your Majesty." She slipped out, closing the door behind her. Alone now, Alara studied her husband. He looked exhausted, fighting himself, and something in her chest twisted. This was what he'd been carrying, the fear that his nature would hurt her, that he couldn't be trusted with what he was asking her to give. "Show me," she said. "What?" "Show me how you feed." "Not from me, from the stored blood. Let me see what it looks like when you're not performing for the houses." She moved to the table, selected one of the bottles. "I need to know what I'm choosing, Kale. All of it." His eyes tracked the bottle like a starving man watching food. "Alara, you don't need to." "Yes, I do." She held it out. "Please." For a long moment, he didn't move. Then slowly, he took the bottle. His hands shook as he uncorked it, and she saw him close his eyes, breathing in the scent. When he looked at her again, his irises had darkened to almost black. "It's not beautiful," he warned, voice rough. "What we are when we feed. I'm not looking for beautiful. I'm looking for true." He raised the bottle to his lips and drank. Alara watched, transfixed. His throat worked with each swallow, his entire body seeming to come alive. The exhaustion melted from his features, replaced by something primal and powerful. His fangs descended. She saw them clearly now, sharp and white against his lips. When he finished, he set the bottle down with careful control, but his chest heaved like he'd been running. "That's what you'll witness," he said roughly. "In 2 days. Except it will be your blood, your throat, your life in my hands." Alara's pulse hammered, but not entirely from fear. There was something compelling about seeing him like this, unguarded, hungry, real. "Does it hurt?" she asked. "Being this hungry?" "Yes." The admission seemed torn from him. "It's like fire in the veins. Every heartbeat near me sounds like thunder. Every breath carries the scent of blood. I can hear your pulse from here, Alara. Can smell the warmth of you." He turned away, gripping the table. "This is why I stayed away. Why? I couldn't risk being close to you. Because wanting your blood and wanting you became impossible to separate." The confession hung in the air, raw and dangerous. Alara should have been terrified, should have run. But instead, she felt something else, a strange sense of power. He'd spent 7 years protecting her from this, from himself, and it had cost him. Cost them both. "What if I don't want to be separate from it?" The words escaped before she could stop them. Kale turned sharply. "What?" "The blood and the wanting." She forced herself to hold his gaze, even as heat flooded her cheeks. "You're asking me to let you feed from me, to bind us together. But you're still treating those things like they're shameful. Like I need to be protected from the reality of what you are. You do know." She cut him off. "I need honesty, Kale. If we do this, if I give you my blood, I need to know it means something. Not just politically, not just to satisfy the houses, but to you." Her voice dropped. "Do you want to feed from me? Not because you have to, but because you want to." The question seemed to shatter something in him. His control cracked, and she saw the truth in his eyes, hunger and longing and desperate, aching need. "Yes," he whispered. "God help me, yes. I've wanted it since the night we married. Wanted to know how you taste, how you'd feel in my arms, whether you'd sigh or cry out when He stopped, breathing hard. But wanting isn't enough. Wanting is how vampires become monsters, or how they become partners. Alar moved closer, emboldened by his honesty. You said the bond goes both ways, that I'd feel your emotions too. Would I feel this? The wanting? Yes. His voice was strained. Every time I looked at you, every time I got close, you'd know exactly how much I've been starving myself. How much? He stopped again, shaking his head. It's too much. I shouldn't have told you. I'm glad you did. And she was. Because for the first time in 7 years, she understood. The distance hadn't been indifference, it had been restraint, fear, a desperate attempt to protect her from the intensity of what he felt. One more day, she said softly. Tomorrow night. Show me the ceremony, the ritual, every detail. And then, she swallowed hard. Then I'll give you my answer. Kale's eyes searched hers, and she saw hope, war with fear, in their depths. And if your answer is no, then you'll have to find another way to save your kingdom. She tried to smile, but it wavered. But you should know I'm not afraid of you. Kale, not anymore. Maybe you should be, he said quietly, but when she left the blood reserve, walking back toward the sunlit halls, she felt his gaze follow her like a physical touch, and for the first time since arriving at Blackmore Keep 7 years ago, Alara wondered what it would feel like to be wanted by someone who'd spent 2 centuries learning to deny himself everything. Tomorrow, she'd find out. Chapter 6. The ritual unveiled. The final night before the ceremony arrived quickly, Alara spent the day in a haze of nervous energy. Unable to eat, unable to focus on anything except the meeting Kale had promised her. As dusk fell, she found herself pacing her chambers. Dressed in a simple white shift, the traditional garment for bonding rituals, Marin had explained with worried eyes. When Kale knocked, her heart leapt into her throat. He entered without waiting for permission, and she saw immediately that he was different tonight. Gone was the careful distance, the measured control. His eyes were dark with hunger he hadn't fed again, she realized, and something else. Determination, maybe. Or resignation. Are you ready? He asked. No, she admitted. But show me anyway. He led her to a chamber she'd never seen before, small, private, lit by candles that cast everything in warm gold. In the center stood a cushioned bench, and beside it, a table laid with ritual implements, a silver knife, silk cords, and a crystal vial. This is where the private bonding would happen, Kale explained, his voice carefully neutral. If we were doing this without witnesses. But tomorrow. He stopped, jaw tightening. Tomorrow? We perform this in the throne hall, before every house. Alara's stomach churned. Walk me through it. Everything. Kale moved to the bench, gesturing for her to sit. She did, and he knelt beside her, the position placing them at eye level, intimate and unsettling. The ceremony begins with declaration, he said. I would state my intent before the houses that I claim you as my bonded mate, my queen, under the old laws and the new. You would be given the chance to refuse. And if I do, then I have no defense against House Valen's challenge. The treaty falls apart, and the old ways return. His eyes held hers. But if you accept, we proceed to the binding. He reached for the silk cords. Your wrists would be bound not to restrain you, but as symbol, a reminder that what happens next requires trust. That you're choosing to be vulnerable with me. Alara's breath quickened as he demonstrated, looping the soft silk around her wrists loosely enough that she could break free with a simple tug. The gesture was symbolic, as he said, but it made everything feel suddenly intensely real. Then, she whispered, then I would prepare the site. His fingers ghosted over the side of her neck, not quite touching. Here, where the major artery runs close to the surface. I'd use the ceremonial blade to make a small incision. Tradition requires the first blood to be drawn by steel, not fang. Why? To prove control. That I can see your blood and not lose myself to instinct. His hand trembled slightly. It's a test, Alara, for both of us. She absorbed this, trying to imagine the reality of it. Standing before hundreds of watching vampires while Kale cut her throat. Even knowing it was ritual, knowing he wouldn't hurt her, the image made her dizzy. And after the cut, she managed. After I feed. His voice dropped, rough and raw. I would seal my mouth over the wound and drink. Not much, just enough to forge the connection. The venom in my bite would numb the pain, create euphoria. You'd feel. He stopped, struggling. Pleasure, warmth, a sense of falling. And then the bond would snap into place. What does that feel like? Kale's eyes closed briefly. Like lightning through the blood. Like every emotion you've ever felt concentrated into a single moment. You'd know me, Alara. Everything I am, everything I've hidden, it would flood through you. And I would know you the same way. The intimacy of it staggered her. Not just the physical act, but the emotional vulnerability. No more walls. No more careful distance. Complete terrifying honesty. How long? She asked. The feeding? Minutes. But it will feel longer. He met her eyes. Time stretches during the bond, and the houses will watch every second, judging whether the connection is genuine, whether your pleasure is real or performed. Heat flooded Alara's cheeks. They'll know what I'm feeling. They'll see it on your face, hear it in your breath. His voice was almost apologetic. There's no hiding in a bonding ceremony. It's designed to be exposing, proof that both parties submit willingly to the connection. Alara's mind reeled. She'd been prepared for pain, for fear, but pleasure. In front of an audience of predators watching for weakness? I don't know if I can do this, she whispered. Kale's expression softened. He reached up slowly, giving her time to pull away, and cupped her face with one cold hand. Then don't, he said gently. Walk away, Alara. I'll find another way to fight House Valen. You'll lose. She covered his hand with hers. You said it yourself. Without proof of the bond, you have no defense. I won't force you into this. I know, and she did. Despite the hunger in his eyes, despite the desperation of their situation, she believed he would let her go if she asked. That certainty made the choice both easier and harder. She took a shaking breath. Show me the rest. I need to see all of it. Something pained crossed his face, but he nodded. He released her wrists from the symbolic binding and stood, helping her to her feet. After the feeding, after the bond settles, there's one final element. He picked up the crystal vial. I would give you my blood. Just a few drops on your tongue. It completes the circuit, ensures the connection runs both ways. Your blood? Alara hadn't expected that. The bond isn't one-sided. If I take from you, I must give in return. It's ancient law, older than the houses, older than the treaties. He uncorked the vial, and she saw dark liquid inside. This is from yesterday. I had Teresa preserve it. He held it out, and Alara stared at the vial. Vampire blood. The substance that created immortals, that healed the dying, that bound mortals to their makers. If she drank it, what will it do to me? She asked. Nothing permanent. Not from such a small amount. You'd heal faster for a few days, feel stronger, more alert. Your senses would sharpen temporarily. His voice was careful. But you wouldn't turn. That requires massive amounts, deliberate transformation. This is just a taste. Enough to forge the link. Alara took the vial with trembling hands. The liquid inside seemed to shimmer in the candlelight, beautiful and terrifying. May I? She asked. Kale's eyes widened. You don't have to. I need to know what it's like. Before tomorrow, before the houses are watching, I need to understand. She met his gaze. Please, let me choose this part now, on my own terms. For a long moment, he simply stared at her. Then slowly, he nodded. Alara raised the vial to her lips. The blood was cold, viscous, tasting of copper and something else, something electric, alive. She swallowed, and heat exploded through her veins. The room sharpened. She could hear Kale's breathing, slow, controlled, utterly inhuman. Could see the individual flames in each candle, the texture of his skin, the way his pupils dilated as he watched her. Every sense amplified, and for a dizzying moment, she understood what it was to be vampire. To feel everything. Alara, Kale's voice was strained. Your heartbeat. I can hear it racing. She could too now. Could hear the rush of blood through her own body, feel the warmth of her skin in the cool air. And beneath it all, a strange pull toward him, as if his blood inside her recognized its source. Is this what you feel? She asked, breathless. All the time? This is just an echo, a shadow. He stepped closer, and she saw his control fracturing. But yes, this is how I experience you. Your heat, your life, He stopped, breathing hard. This is why I had to stay away. Why, being near you was agony. The confession broke something open between them. Alara moved without thinking, closing the distance, drawn by the blood bond and something deeper. Tomorrow, she whispered. When you feed from me in front of the houses, will you feel this? Stronger. His eyes were nearly black now, fixed on her throat, where her pulse hammered visibly. Overwhelming. Like drowning in you. Then tonight, she said, surprising herself with her boldness. Teach me how to breathe underwater. Kale's control shattered. He pulled her close, not to feed, but to hold his arms banding around her like iron. His face buried in her hair. You're going to destroy me, he whispered against her temple. Only if you destroy me first, she whispered back. They stood there in the candlelight, wrapped in each other, both knowing that tomorrow everything would change. Tomorrow, she would bleed for him, and tomorrow, he would finally claim his wife. Chapter 7. Blood in Vousley throne hall filled as midnight approached. Alara stood in the preparation chamber, watching through a narrow window as vampires from all 5 houses assembled below. They came in their finest silks and velvets and deep jewel tones, ancient jewelry that caught the candlelight like captured stars. Beautiful and terrible, every one of them predators dressed in civilization's clothes, and in hours, they would watch her bleed. My lady, Marin's voice was soft behind her. It's time to dress. The ceremonial gown lay waiting, white silk that pooled like water. The neckline cut wide to expose her shoulders and throat, traditional, symbolic. A bride offering herself to her immortal husband. Alara's hands shook as Marin helped her into it. You don't have to do this, Marin whispered as she laced the back. Even now, you could refuse. No one would blame you. Kale would lose everything. Better his kingdom than your life. But Alara shook her head. She'd made her choice last night, standing in Kale's arms, feeling his blood sing through her veins. She'd seen the man beneath the crown, lonely, desperate, trying so hard to be better than what he was made to be. She wouldn't let him fall. I'm ready, she said. Marin's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded. She placed a final touch, a circlet of silver that marked Alara as queen, then stepped back. You look, she couldn't finish, like a sacrifice? Alara tried to smile, like someone worthy of him. A knock at the door made them both jump. A guard entered, bowing. Your Majesty, the Alpha King requests your presence. The ceremony begins. Alara took a breath, then another. Then she walked toward her fate. The throne hall had been transformed. Red silk draped the walls, and thousands of candles burned in iron sconces, casting everything in blood-warm light. The assembled vampires stood in a wide circle around the central dais, their inhuman eyes tracking her as she entered. And at the center, beside the black throne, stood Kale. He wore ceremonial black, a long coat embroidered with silver thread, dark leather beneath, his hair pulled back to expose the sharp planes of his face. He looked every inch the Alpha King, powerful, dangerous, untouchable, until their eyes met. Then she saw the fear. He was terrified of hurting her, of losing control, of what came next. The realization steadied her somehow. They were both walking into the unknown. At least they'd do it together. Alara crossed the hall, her bare feet silent on cold marble. The vampires watched in predatory silence, no whispers, no movement, just hundreds of ancient creatures waiting to judge. When she reached the dais, Kale extended his hand. She took it, and his fingers closed around hers with careful gentleness. Last chance, he murmured, too low for anyone else to hear. Say no, and I'll end this. Ask me, she whispered back. His throat worked. Then he raised his voice, addressing the assembled houses. Alaria Shorin, his formal tone carried through the hall. 7 years ago, you came to me as part of a treaty, a bridge between mortal and immortal worlds. Tonight, I ask you to become something more, to bind yourself to me in blood and oath, to stand as my true queen before all the houses. His eyes held hers. Do you consent? The words were ritual, but the question was real. Alara's voice rang clear. I consent. A ripple moved through the watching vampires. She heard whispers now, surprise, speculation, hunger. Kale guided her to a chair that had been placed at the center of the dais. Not a throne, but something lower, more vulnerable. She sat, and he knelt before her, a king humbling himself before his queen. Your wrists, he said softly. She offered them, and he bound them with the silk cords loose. Symbolic, a reminder of the trust required. His hands trembled slightly as he tied the knots. Then he picked up the ceremonial blade. The silver knife gleamed in the candlelight, ancient and deadly. Kale tested the edge with his thumb, and a line of dark blood welled up. It healed almost instantly, but Alara saw how the watching vampires leaned forward, scenting it. Bare your throat, Kale said, voice rough. Alara tilted her head back, exposing the long line of her neck. Cool air kissed her skin, and she felt her pulse hammering against her collarbone. Kale's eyes darkened to black. He leaned close, and she felt his breath, unnecessary, theatrical, done for her benefit. Ghost across her throat. Breathe, he whispered. And trust me. The blade touched her skin. She gasped at the cold sting, felt warm blood well from the shallow cut. It ran down her neck in a slow rivulet, and the hall erupted in sound. Vampires hissing, shifting, their control tested by the scent of fresh mortal blood. But Kale didn't move. He knelt there, blade steady, watching her blood flow, proving his control. You're perfect, he breathed. So perfect. Then he struck, his mouth sealed over the wound, and Alara cried out, not in pain, but in shock. The venom hit her system like lightning, pleasure exploding through every nerve. Her back arched, her hands clenching uselessly in their silk bonds. She felt him drink, felt each pull of his mouth, each swallow, and with it came the connection. His emotions flooded through her, desperate hunger, yes, but also wonder, gratitude, love so fierce it burned. He loved her. Had loved her for 7 years, keeping that feeling locked behind walls, because he thought she deserved better than to be wanted by a monster. Not a monster, she thought, and felt him pause. Never a monster. The bond snapped into place. Alara screamed. It was lightning and fire and drowning all at once, every wall between them shattering, every secret laid bare. She felt his 200 years of loneliness, his desperate need for connection, his bone-deep fear of becoming like his father. And he felt her grief at being unwanted, her quiet strength, her choice to trust him despite everything. Alara, his voice in her mind awed and terrified. I feel you. I know, she thought back. I feel you too. He pulled back from her throat, and she saw his face, blood on his lips, tears streaming down his cheeks. Vampires didn't cry, couldn't cry, but he was. The vial. Someone said she didn't recognize the voice. Kale lifted the crystal vial with shaking hands. His blood offered in return. He brought it to her lips, and she parted them, letting him tip the cold liquid onto her tongue. The circuit completed. Power surged between them, not magical, but emotional, real. She felt his heartbeat that didn't exist, heard his thoughts tangled with hers, knew him as completely as she knew herself, and through the bond, she felt his hunger satisfied at last. Not just for blood, but for connection, for being known and loved anyway. I love you, she thought, the realization crystallizing. God help me. I love you. His breath caught. Then his arms were around her, lifting her from the chair, cradling her against his chest as the silk bonds fell away. Mine, he said, and this time it wasn't possessive. It was reverent. My wife, my queen, my heart, yours, she whispered against his throat. Finally yours. The assembled houses erupted in chaos, some cheering, some hissing in fury, House Valen's members storming from the hall in rage. But Alara barely heard it. She was wrapped in Kale's arms, drowning in the bond between them. Feeling loved for the first time in 7 years, the Alpha King had finally claimed his wife, and she had claimed him right back. But as the celebration began, as vampires moved forward to offer congratulations and binding gifts, Alara felt something else through the bond. Danger, coming fast. Kale felt it too. His arms tightened around her, his body going rigid with warrior instinct. What is it? She thought. House Valen, he answered grimly. They're not accepting this. Then the doors exploded inward, and armed vampires poured into the hall. The siege had begun. Chapter 8. The breaking point. The world exploded into violence. House Valen's forces flooded the throne hall. 20 vampires, maybe more, moving with inhuman speed. The assembled guests scattered, some fleeing, others drawing weapons. Steel rang against steel as Kale's guards engaged the attackers, but Alara barely registered the chaos. The bond flooded her with Kale's instincts. Protect her, get her safe, move now, and his arms were already lifting her, carrying her toward a side exit. No, she struggled against his grip. Kale, you can't abandon your people, they'll kill you to get to me. His voice was savage, his eyes pure black. Through the bond, she felt his terror, not for himself, but for her. I won't risk you. An attacker lunged from the shadows. Kale moved faster than thought, still holding Alara with one arm while catching the vampire's throat with the other. The crack of breaking bone made her flinch, but through the bond she felt no remorse from Kale, only cold calculation. He's killed before, she realized. Many times. I'm sorry, his thoughts whispered to hers. Sorry you have to see this. But there was no time for apologies. More attackers converged, and Kale was forced to set her down, pushing her behind him as he faced 3 vampires simultaneously. They moved like dancers, all grace and lethal precision. Kale fought with centuries of experience, but he was outnumbered. Alara watched in horror as claws raked across his shoulder, dark blood blooming through his coat. Through the bond, she felt his pain. It drove the air from her lungs, made her stumble. This was what he'd warned her about, feeling everything he felt, living his injuries as her own. But it worked both ways. She felt his relief when she stayed standing, his desperate need to keep her safe. The queen. Someone shouted, take the queen. 2 vampires broke from the main fight, rushing toward Alara. She froze, instinct and terror warring in her chest. She was mortal, fragile, utterly defenseless against immortal predators, but she was also bound to their king. Stop. Kale's voice carried command, the alpha dominance that made other vampires falter. The attackers hesitated for a split second. It was enough. Kale was there, moving between Alara and the threat, but the distraction cost him. Another attacker struck from behind, a blade sliding between his ribs. Alara screamed, not from her own pain, but from his white-hot agony that tore through the bond like fire. She felt his lung collapse, felt blood filling spaces it shouldn't, felt his body struggling to heal around the embedded blade. Kale, run, he thought desperately. Please, Alara, run, but she couldn't, wouldn't. Through the bond, she felt his strength failing, felt the poison on the blade working through his system. Something designed to slow vampire healing, to weaken him. They were going to kill him, and she was just standing here, useless, mortal, watching her husband die. No, Alara's gaze swept the hall. Chaos everywhere, fighting vampires, scattered weapons, overturned candles. And there, on the dais, the ceremonial blade, still stained with her blood. She ran. Stop her. Lady Sienna's voice cut through the noise. Don't let the mortal, but Alara was already moving, fueled by adrenaline and desperation. She grabbed the blade, its silver edge burning cold in her palm. Through the bond, she felt Kale's confusion, his horror at what she was doing. Alara. No, she slashed her own wrist. Blood welled up, bright and red, and the effect was instantaneous. Every vampire in the hall froze, their heads snapping toward her. The scent of fresh mortal blood enhanced by the bond, by Kale's claim, was intoxicating, overwhelming. Here, she shouted, her voice stronger than she felt. You want blood? Come, take it. She was bait, human bait, drawing predators away from their wounded king. The attackers surged toward her, but Kale was faster. He moved despite his injuries, despite the poison, driven by pure terror at seeing his bonded mate bleeding and vulnerable. He caught the first vampire mid-leap, tearing him apart with savage efficiency. The second fell to Kale's guards, who'd rallied at their king's fury, and Sienna, beautiful, cold Sienna, appeared before Alara in a blur of motion. Foolish girl, she hissed. Did you think you could? Her words cut off as Alara stabbed upward with the ceremonial blade. The silver sank into Sienna's shoulder, not a killing blow, but enough. The vampire shrieked, stumbling back, and Kale was there, his hand closing around Sienna's throat. You attacked my wife, he said, voice dead calm. In my hall, during a bonding ceremony. The bond is false, Sienna spat. A performance to save your failing rule. She bled for me. Kale's grip tightened. Through the bond, Alara felt his rage, cold, controlled, absolutely lethal. She risked her mortal life to protect me. There is no greater proof of a true bond than that. He looked around the hall at the assembled vampires, attackers and witnesses alike. House Valen has violated sacred law. They've shed blood during a bonding, attacked their alpha king, threatened his bonded mate. His voice carried command. Under ancient right, I claim justice. Sienna's eyes widened. You can't. I exile House Valen from the Northern Territories. Effective immediately. Any who remain past dawn will be hunted as rogues. Gasps echoed through the hall. Exile was a death sentence for most vampires. Needed territory, protection. The structure of house politics to survive. But Kale wasn't finished. And you, Sienna. He pulled her close, his fangs descending. You die tonight. Kale, wait. Alara's thought cut through his rage. He paused, eyes still black with fury. She tried to kill you. I know. But if you execute her, you prove their point that you're a tyrant ruling through fear. Alara moved closer, ignoring the pain in her wrist, the exhaustion pulling at her. Show mercy. Show them you're better than the old ways. Through the bond, she felt him struggle. Every instinct screamed for vengeance, for Sienna's death. But slowly, painfully, his control returned. He released Sienna, letting her crumple to the floor. You have until dawn, he said coldly. Then you're dead either way. Sienna fled, and with her, the remaining attackers. The hall fell silent except for the crackling of overturned candles and the harsh breathing of wounded vampires. Kale turned to Alara, and the mask finally cracked. He pulled her into his arms, careful of her injured wrist, his body shaking. Don't ever do that again, he whispered fiercely. Don't ever risk yourself like that. You are dying. I'm already dead. His laugh was broken. But you're everything, Alara. You're the only warm thing in my world, and I can't. His voice broke. I can't lose you. Through the bond, she felt the depth of his terror. Not for his kingdom, not for his power, but for her. She was his weakness now, the one vulnerability his enemies could exploit. Then we protect each other, she said softly. That's what the bond means. Partnership, not possession. He pulled back to look at her, and she saw wonder in his eyes. You stabbed a vampire. I stabbed a vampire, she agreed. Slightly hysterical. My mortal wife attacked an immortal predator to save me. Your mortal wife is bleeding and exhausted and needs you to heal her wrist. Before she passes out, Kale's expression shifted immediately to concern. He cradled her injured arm, bringing her wrist to his lips. His tongue traced the wound, and she felt his venom work, numbing the pain, accelerating healing. When he finished, the cut was barely visible. We should leave, he said quietly, glancing around the hall. Before any other houses decide to test my rule. Where? Somewhere safe. Somewhere private. His eyes met hers. Somewhere I can make sure you're truly all right. Through the bond, she felt what he didn't say, that he needed to touch her, hold her, convince himself she'd survived. That the terror of nearly losing her was still clawing at his control. Take me home, she whispered, and for the first time since their marriage. When Kale carried his wife from the throne hall, they were going to the same chambers, together. Chapter 9. Dawn's quiet. Truth. Kale's chambers were nothing like Alara expected. She'd imagined darkness, cold stone, a space as austere as the man who ruled from it. Instead, she found warmth, a fire burning bright in a massive hearth, shelves lined with books, windows facing east to catch the sunrise he could never see. It was a room designed for living, not just existing. I've never brought anyone here, Kale said quietly, setting her down near the fire. Not in 200 years. Through the bond, she felt his vulnerability. This was his true sanctuary, the place where he let down every guard. And he was sharing it with her. It's beautiful, she said. He looked at her like she'd given him something precious. Then his expression shifted to concern. Let me see your wrist. She extended her arm, and he examined the healed wound with careful fingers. The bleeding had stopped, but bruises were forming purple shadows against her pale skin. I should have protected you better, he said, voice tight with self-recrimination. Should have anticipated Valen's attack. Should have. You were stabbed through the lung. Alara cut him off. Where is that wound, by the way? Kale's hand went to his side automatically. Healed, mostly. Vampire metabolism burns through toxins quickly. Show me. He hesitated, then slowly removed his coat and shirt. Alara's breath caught. His torso was a map of scars, old ones, faded to silver lines across pale skin. Evidence of centuries of violence. But the new wound was still visible, a dark bruise spreading from between his ribs. Does it hurt? She asked. Not as much as feeling your terror through the bond. His eyes found hers. When you cut yourself, when I felt your pain mixed with your determination to save me, he stopped, swallowing hard. I've never been that frightened. Not in 200 years. Alara reached up, touching the bruise gently. He flinched, then leaned into her touch. We're even then, she said softly. Because watching you fight, feeling you hurt, I wanted to die every time you took a hit. That's the bond. It makes everything more intense. No, she met his eyes. That's love, Kale. The bond just lets me feel what was already there. He went very still. Through their connection, she felt his shock, his disbelief, his desperate hope that she meant it. You love me? His voice was barely a whisper. I think I've loved you for a while. I just didn't have a name for it. She smiled softly. 7 years of watching you from across rooms, wondering why you wouldn't look at me. Building entire stories in my head about your reasons. And now I know you were looking. You just couldn't let yourself want me. I'm still not sure I should. But his hands came up to frame her face, gentle despite their strength. You could have died tonight, Alara. Because of me, because of what I am, I could die tomorrow from 1,000 mortal causes. At least this way, I die for something that matters. She covered his hands with hers. I choose this. I choose you. Stop trying to protect me from my own decisions. A sound escaped him, half laugh, half sob. Then he was kissing her, not the controlled, ceremonial kiss from their wedding 7 years ago, but something desperate and real. His lips moved against hers with barely restrained hunger, and she felt through the bond how hard he was fighting not to lose control. You won't hurt me, she thought to him. I trust you. The bond blazed between them, emotions tangling, his need and her acceptance, his fear and her courage, his darkness and her light. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. The sun will rise soon, Kale said roughly. I'll need to sleep. But I don't want to leave you alone. Not after tonight. Then don't. The boldness of her words surprised them both. Stay with me. Let me see what it's like the day sleep. All of it. He searched her face. It's not peaceful. Sometimes I dream. Sometimes I just cease. And I'm vulnerable. Completely defenseless. I'll watch over you, she promised. The way you've watched over me. Through the bond, she felt his resistance crumbling. He'd spent so long hiding the darker aspects of what he was, but the bond made hiding impossible. She knew about the hunger that never fully stopped, the weight of immortality, the loneliness of outliving everyone he'd ever cared about, and she loved him anyway. All right, he said finally. But if you change your mind, if it frightens you, it won't. He led her to his bed, massive, draped in dark fabrics, positioned away from the windows. As dawn approached, she watched him move with increasing heaviness, his body responding to ancient instincts. Lie with me? He asked, vulnerability naked in his voice. Alara climbed onto the bed, and he pulled her close, arranging her against his chest. His body was already cooling, his heartbeat, the one that only existed because of her blood in his system, slowing to almost nothing. I can feel it, she whispered, awed. Through the bond, your consciousness pulling away. Will you be here? His voice was fading. When I wake? Always. She kissed his cold lips. Sleep, Kale. I'm not going anywhere. His eyes closed. Within moments, his body went utterly still, no breath, no movement, nothing but cold flesh and fading warmth. To anyone else, he would look dead, but through the bond, Alara felt him. Felt the spark of consciousness retreating deep, deep inside, waiting for night to call it back. It was unsettling and beautiful, this trust he showed her. This vulnerability. She held him as the sun rose outside his windows, streaming light across floors. He'd never walk in daylight. And she understood finally what it meant to love a vampire, to hold on to something both eternal and fragile, powerful and desperately alone. Hours passed. She dozed occasionally, always waking to check that he still lay peaceful beside her. The bond hummed quietly between them, steady and sure. When afternoon shadows began to lengthen, she felt him stir. Not physically, his body remained still as death, but through their connection, she felt consciousness returning, rising toward the surface like a swimmer breaching water. Alara? His thought was tentative, uncertain. I'm here. Still here. His relief flooded through the bond, so intense it brought tears to her eyes. He'd been afraid, she realized. Afraid she'd see him in day sleep and run, unable to accept what he truly was. Never, she thought fiercely. I'm not leaving you, Kale. Not for anything. When? His eyes finally opened, gray and clear in the dim light. She was smiling. Hello, she said softly. You stayed. Wonder colored his voice. I told you I would. He pulled her closer, burying his face in her hair. Thank you, he whispered, for not being afraid, for choosing this, for his voice broke, for loving something like me. You're not a thing. She tilted her head to look at him. You're the man who reformed brutal laws to protect mortals, who went 7 years without claiming his wife because he wanted to protect her, who cried when he finally fed from me because the connection overwhelmed you. She touched his face. You're the man I love. All of you, the king, the vampire, the lonely immortal who just wants to be known. Kale's control finally shattered. He kissed her again, deeper this time, and through the bond, she felt everything: his love, his gratitude, that she'd stayed, that she'd chosen him. What happens now? She asked when they finally broke apart. Now? He smiled, and it transformed his face. Now we figure out how to rule together, how to face the other houses, how to live with this bond between us, and House Valen. His expression hardened. They're exiled. If they return, they die. But they won't be the last challenge we face. Other houses will test our bond, look for weakness, then we show them strength. Alar's voice was firm. Together. No more distance. No more separation. We face them as what we are: partners. Partners, he repeated, tasting the word. Then he smiled again. My queen, my partner, my heart, your wife, she added. Finally, truly, your wife. And in the growing darkness, wrapped in each other's arms, the Alpha King and his mortal queen began to build something neither had thought possible: a future, together. Chapter 10. Epilogue. The Queen's Coic. Months later. Council chamber fell silent as Alara entered. She'd learned to read the room in the months since the bonding, could sense the tension in how the assembled house representatives held themselves, the way their ancient eyes tracked her movement. They still weren't used to her presence at these meetings, to a mortal queen who spoke with her own voice rather than echoing her husband's words. Good. Let them stay uncomfortable. Kale sat at the head of the table, but his eyes found hers immediately. Through the bond, she felt his quiet pride, his love, his amusement at the diplomatic chaos she was about to unleash. Behave, he thought to her, warmth coloring the words. Never, she answered, and felt his mental laugh. She took her seat beside him, not behind, not below, but equal. It had taken 3 months of careful political maneuvering to claim this chair, but she'd won it. Just as she'd won the right to attend night court, to speak in council, to be queen in truth, rather than title. Lady Alara, Lord Marcus of House Thorn inclined his head with grudging respect. We were discussing the new feeding regulations. Some houses feel your suggestions are too restrictive. My laws, Alara corrected gently, not suggestions. And they're hardly restrictive, they simply require consent, fair compensation, and medical monitoring for mortal donors. Basic decency. Decency is a mortal concept, Lady Viridian said, her tone dismissive. We are vampires. Our needs, your needs, don't override someone else's autonomy. Alara kept her voice calm, reasonable. She'd learned that anger made them dismiss her as emotional, as to human. These laws protect both mortals and vampires. Happy, healthy donors provide better blood. It's practical, not just ethical. She has a point, Lord Marcus admitted. Since implementing the trial program in my territory, complaints have decreased significantly, because you're paying them, Viridian snapped. Wasting resources on cattle. The temperature in the room dropped. Kale didn't move, didn't speak, but his presence became suddenly, terrifyingly heavy. Alpha dominance radiating from him in waves that made every vampire at the table flinch. That word, he said softly, dangerously, is no longer used in my territories. Mortals are not cattle. They are not property. They are citizens under my protection. his eyes fixed on Viridian. "Do we understand each other?" She paled. "Yes, Your Majesty." The tension broke as Kale's power withdrew, but Alara felt through the bond how much control that display had cost him. 6 months of fighting for reforms, of pushing against centuries of ingrained prejudice, was wearing on them both. Later, she thought to him, "We'll rest later. Promise?" "Promise." The meeting continued, discussing trade agreements and territorial disputes, the mundane politics of ruling immortal creatures who remembered grudges from centuries past. Alara contributed where she could, learning their language, their games, earning respect one careful word at a time. When it finally ended, she and Kale walked together through the keep's corridors, their hands linked. "You were magnificent," he said, once they were alone. "I made Viridian want to murder me. She wanted to murder you anyway. At least now she also fears you." He pulled her close, kissing her temple. "My fierce mortal queen, reshaping the vampire world one stubborn law at a time. Your mortal queen, who's exhausted and wants wine and a bath. I can arrange that." But his expression grew serious. "Alara, there's something we need to discuss." Through the bond, she felt his nervousness, his fear of her reaction. "What is it?" He led her to their private chambers, the rooms they now shared, a blend of her warmth and his darkness. Once inside, he turned to face her, taking both her hands. "You've been bonded to me for 6 months," he said quietly. "Living in my world, fighting my battles, aging while I stay frozen. And I've been thinking about what comes next." Alara's heart kicked. She knew what he was asking, had known this conversation was coming. The turn. "I would never force it, never even suggest it, if you were happy remaining mortal. But watching you grow tired from these political fights, knowing that one day you'll age and sicken while I watch helplessly," his voice cracked. "I'm selfish enough to want forever with you. But only if it's what you want too." The offer hung between them, weighted with possibility and terror. To become vampire. To trade mortality for immortality. Humanity for something other. To never see her sister age. To watch the mortal world change while she remained static. But also to have eternity with the man she loved. To never face the day when her mortal body failed and the bond ripped them apart. To rule beside Kale, not as his fragile queen, but as his equal in power and time. "I want to think about it," she said honestly. "This isn't a decision to rush." Relief flooded through the bond. "Of course. Take all the time you need. Years if necessary. I just wanted you to know the offer stands. Whenever you're ready. If you're ever ready." Alara pulled him close, resting her head against his chest where no heartbeat sounded. "Ask me again in a year. When we've had time to finish the reforms, to see if this peace holds. When I've had time to say goodbye to being human. And if your answer is still no, then you love me until I'm old and gray, and you let me go when the time comes." She looked up at him. "Can you do that? Can you love me knowing I might choose mortality?" Kale's eyes shone with unshed tears. "I would love you in any form, for any length of time. Mortal or immortal, young or old, you're mine, Alara, and I'm yours. The bond doesn't change that." "Good answer," she said, smiling through her own tears. He kissed her then, deep and slow. And through the bond, they shared everything, love and hope and the bittersweet knowledge that forever was both a gift and a burden. When they finally broke apart, Kale rested his forehead against hers. "Whatever you choose," he whispered, "we'll face it together." "Together," she agreed. That night, as Alara lay in their bed watching moonlight paint silver across her husband's sleeping face, she thought about futures. About the mortal life she'd known, safe, limited, already slipping away. And about the immortal existence he offered, dangerous, eternal, utterly unknown. She didn't know yet which she would choose, but she knew this. Whether she had 50 more years or 5,000, she would spend them fighting beside this lonely, immortal king, building something better than what came before, loving him fiercely, completely, without reservation. She'd been given to him as a treaty, a political token meant to bridge two worlds. Instead, she'd become his partner, his equal, his queen in every sense that mattered, and that, she thought, as sleep claimed her, was worth any price, even immortality. 2 years Laterth court assembled. As the doors opened, she entered in crimson silk, her hair loose and wild, her eyes burning with newfound power. No longer mortal, no longer fragile vampire now, turned and transformed, eternal, but still herself. Still, his Alara, who'd spent 2 years preparing for this change. saying goodbye to her sister, finishing the reforms that would protect mortals even after she ceased to be one. Kale stood from his throne as she approached, and the love in his eyes could have lit the darkest night. "My queen," he said, voice thick with emotion. "Welcome home." She took his hand, their bond blazing bright and eternal now. "My king," she answered. "Let's build a better world." And together, immortal, now and forever, they turned to face their kingdom. The Alpha King and his queen, partners, equals, finally, truly, complete.